Okay, today we're continuing our series on our journey home, looking at the hidden treasure. And I like this idea of our journey home because that's really what we're doing. We're remembering what is true of ourselves as spiritual beings. And not just that, but we are seeing where that fits into our daily experience. Because it does throw a different light on the way we think about things. And we'll kind of cover some of that here today in this message. But the parable is one I've used often. It's become kind of a staple of my whole theology. Because I think it reveals some very important principles that are shows that Jesus was pretty tuned in to, I think, the ideas that we share here, or we're tuned into the ideas he shared, maybe I should say it that way. But it's very short when he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field." And there's another parable that follows that about the pearl of great price. The merchant or the person goes in and finds a pearl worth a lot of money. And so he sells everything he has. It's exactly the same idea. And Matthew put them together as a series. But I've always liked this one because there are more elements to it that can be expanded on. So the first thing that we would ask when Jesus is talking about a treasure, what is he talking about? What did this guy find? What did this man find that was so valuable? So valuable that he would sell everything he has to own the treasure. What is it? And I went online and I asked that question, found several websites, and just what treasure was Jesus referring to? I just read an article from a religious academic that said the treasure is Jesus Christ and the salvation he offers. So we might accept that at face value if we didn't stop and think about it, because such an idea would have been foreign to Jesus. Not even crossed his mind when he was talking about a treasure. He would not be thinking about himself or this whole thing that's become the message of the Christian message of salvation. As I pointed out last week, the Jew of Jesus' day did not think of the afterlife as we think of it in a Christian context. The Jew focused on life, not on what happens afterward. And Jesus was a Jew. He would have thought from that perspective. Everything that we see of him in the Gospels, he was surrounded by Jews. He grew up in a Jewish family. He was taught in the synagogue. He studied Jewish scripture. Everything about him was Jewish. And so we would assume that this Christian idea, the Christianized idea of life after death, that we go to heaven or hell and all of that, that we're in need of salvation, that we're born in sin and all of that, he would have probably been exposed to that idea because that goes clear back to the Garden of Eden. And that allegory, just to get off track a little bit here, was designed to answer the question, why are we suffering? Why is life so hard? In the day of Jesus, in the day of most of the people in that particular part of the world, life was a struggle. They were desert dwellers, and we're desert dwellers here, but we're in kind of a different situation than they were then. Although it's pretty fascinating to me to look at some of the scenery from over there and compare it to the book cliffs and all of that. It looks very much the same. The Dead Sea Scrolls could have been Mount Garfield. That's where they could have been found. It looks like it's the same type of terrain. But we live in a completely different environment. We're not eking our living off the land in the sense that, we have irrigation systems and all that. They had irrigation, but they dug it with these really bad shovels and oxen and all of that stuff, all hand done. where we do it with concrete and everything else. But the idea of, what is this treasure that Jesus is talking about? It's not about salvation. Oh, I was going to say that the Garden of Eden story was just answering the question, here's why people suffer. Here's why we're going through this difficulty, because we disobeyed God. And that started from the very beginning. So this idea that we're born in sin has been adopted by in the Christian context, but it goes back to this idea of why do we suffer? Why is life so hard? And the answer is because we used to live in this beautiful garden. We used to be taken care of, and everything was just fine. But you know the story. We made some bad choices. We did what we were told not to do, exactly the opposite. And we were cast out of that garden, and we've been suffering ever since. And so this whole idea that humankind is thrown out of this garden and we are making our way back to that, and the Christian stands up and says the way to get back in is through Jesus. That's our salvation. Well, Jesus would not have even come close to thinking in those terms. So it's important to keep that in mind. So the treasure that he was talking about, that's the question. What was it? What was he talking about? And I can relate to this because, to the kind of treasure I'm going to talk about, because of the experience I had. I was in a field one day and I found a treasure, and I picked it up, and it ended up changing my life. And that treasure was the book Lessons in Truth, and I found it in this exact library in St. Joseph, Missouri. I have told you the story before, but I never thought to get a picture of the place just to give you an idea of where I was when I was 16 years old and found the book Lessons in Truth. And I took a picture of the little book, and that's not the one I found, because if it was, I would owe a big fine to the library. But it is one that looks a lot like it. It was a little reddish-brown, ugly little book. And the shelving also looks different. It looks like they have remodeled. But it was just a whole string of shelves. And why was I walking down this aisle and happened to glance up 3 feet above my head and saw a little book called Lessons in Truth? And that appealed to me. Of all the thousands of books that were there that I walked past. And it reminds me of the man that saw this treasure in a field. He saw something in this field. And it was probably a field that was well traveled for whatever reason, because he covered it up to hide it so nobody else would see it and get it. Give him time to sell everything he had. Well, I found this treasure, this little book, and it ended up being the same thing. I actually sold everything that I had, in that I devoted my life to the way of life that book represents. And so it's the same thing. That's the kind of treasure we're talking about. It's we discover an idea. We discover a spiritual perception, a perspective. And it makes sense to us. Why does it make sense to us? Why, of all the thousands of books on the shelf, do we pick up that one? Why would that make sense to us? And as I opened that book and read it, I couldn't put it down. And I've never had that happen before. And so when I think of the treasure that the man found, I think of something like this, an idea that he got, that maybe he didn't fully understand it. And he had to go through this process of selling everything he owned in order to own that treasure. And that's really how the spiritual thing works. It's like there's a lot of ideas that you have to give up, just like the one I read prior to this slide. Jesus Christ and the way of salvation is the treasure. Well, that doesn't resonate with me at all. It would have at one time, but I sold that. That was one of the possessions that I owned, and I sold it so I could make room for something else. And it's a process, it's an evolution of consciousness. I say there's no evolution of the soul, but there is evolution of the consciousness. Giving up old ideas, making way for the new. And when I found that treasure, I didn't know what I had. I didn't know what it was, but my heart leapt with joy. So it says the man went in joy, sold everything that he had, so he could buy that field. And I get that. It sounds in the parable like that was a pretty quick deal. And it was not quick for me. But it was the very exact same process. That it was in joy. That once I found this and read it and watched my reaction, felt like I'd come home. And that's part of the journey home thing. That anytime you touch something that makes you feel at home, that feels comfortable, that feels natural, that's probably your soul responding to whatever that is. And that's what you should follow. And when I hear some of the traditional interpretations of Jesus and all of the spiritual things we're supposed to think and do, that doesn't resonate with me at all. It's like I don't belong to that thought at all anymore. I don't own anything in that environment. But I say it's okay if you do. If you want to be there, if that is appealing to you, that's where you should be. That's your home. But we go through this change when we discover this treasure. And to me, the treasure is always, see what happens to us before we find that book on the shelf. There's a little something going on that we are kind of unaware of. We're always looking. It's always pulling. It's always pushing. It's always causing us to ask questions. And what is that? That's what I've often said. That's the thing that caused us to step upon this path. So the presence has always been calling us. It's always been beckoning to open our eyes just a little more. And, I could have easily walked by that book, and as I told you, I shared it with a number of people in those early days, and nobody responded to it in the way I did. I thought that would be unimaginable. Anybody that would read this would get it. It was so clear to me that I thought, here's what you're looking for, read this thing. And you know what it's like when somebody says, read this book or watch that movie. It's not quite the same as when you find it, when you make that connection. And I don't live in the past in that regard. I'm just saying that was the beginning of my journey home. That's where it started. I found a treasure in a field. And so I totally understand this parable from that perspective. Based on evidence that we glean from the mystical thread, the treasure represents a fully active spiritual dimension, the understanding of which would immeasurably enhance the quality of one's life. Gaining this understanding requires a total commitment, but because the man understands its value, he pursues it in joy. That's critical to get. When I found that book, it was in joy. Nobody said, read this book and do what it says. And so I would read the book and try to do what it says. It didn't happen that way. It was my discovery. And obviously I didn't write the book. It was not my discovery. Unity had been around for a long time. But to make that connection, that was mine. Nobody had been down that path before. Around me, nobody around me had been down that path before. So I had no influence. And I tried to get help from my Baptist minister at the time, and he said it was the work of the devil, so that wasn't much help. So it's the kind of thing that causes you to listen to an authority like that and say, I think he's wrong. This is real. This is real. That's not. And that's the kind of thing that is the homecoming, the call to come home. It's the thing that moves you to the point where it's inarguable. It's not that you're closed-minded. It's that you find your way home and you recognize it. You recognize that path. and you pursue it in joy. And does that mean you're happy all the time? No, it doesn't. Sometimes you're very miserable. When you have a high experience, a high moment in your life, and then the next moment is not so high, it can be very depressing. It can be very difficult to deal with. And the higher we go in this spiritual awareness, the more we have to compare to. I'm not there today. I was there yesterday. I'm not there today. So I'm doing something wrong. And we get into this thing with ourselves that we're not enlightened yet, or we've got a problem. We need to read another book. We need to do something. But what we need to remember is the thing that made you pick up the book, or whatever you did, whatever happened in your life, that was very active prior to the picking up of the book. And it's active now. That which has brought you to this point, that which brought you to that point, is bringing you to the next point. It's still active. And so in our high moments, we don't want to say, I need to stay here forever. We will fall. We will have moments when we fall. We come down from those high moments. And we wonder why. We just say, I'm not advanced enough. But there are so many things on earth, so many things in this physical body. Some of us are moving, for example. When was the last time you moved? Last time I moved, I said I'd never do it again. But we're thinking about moving, so thinking about selling our house at some point. But when I think about it, I get very tired. But there's a lot of stuff around the physical body that causes us to forget all the stuff. I was listening to an interview on a near-death thing again this week, and the person was saying, when you're out of your body, you might imagine that you live in a mansion and it's right there. Suddenly it's right there. Well, how cool would that be? You don't even have to move. You don't have to pay anybody to help you. It's like, so why would we go from that to this? It's hard to understand sometimes, where we live in a physical environment that requires a lot of effort. And it requires air conditioning, and it requires, things to make us comfortable. So it's no wonder we get lost in all of that, all those considerations, and we lose sight of the spiritual thing. But it is in joy, that's the thing that keeps guiding us, and keeps us asking questions, keeps us moving forward in positive ways. So the man in his joy sells all that he owns so he can buy the field containing the treasure. You compare this attitude of joy to another instance where Jesus advises a rich young man to sell all his possessions, give the money to the poor, and then follow him. This is a depressing notion to the young man. Okay? This young man represents that situation where somebody hands you a book and says, read this, it'll change your life. You didn't find it. Somebody found it for you, and they know exactly what you need. And so they hand it to you. And you read it, and to kind of appease them, you read it and you sort of do some of the things in it and whatever, and try to make it apply to you, but it's not yours. You didn't find it. It's not your discovery. It's not your treasure. So you would not necessarily read it in joy. Now you may. There's times somebody will hand you something and it will mean something to you. That's they are a channel sometimes to our greater good. People are sometimes that. But you see the difference. This guy is looking for the trick, the key to eternal life, and he comes to Jesus and says, "What do I do?" And Jesus goes through this list of things. You obey the 10 Commandments, you do this, you do that. And he said, well, I've done all that. So to the man, it's about another accomplishment. If I just accomplish one more thing, I'll get this sense of eternal life. So Jesus advises him, sell everything you have. He can apparently tell the man's very attached to his attachments, very attached to his possessions. His possessions are defining him, in other words. He's seen what the most important thing is. It's the man's image, his self-image. And that's created by wealth. It's not to put down wealth, but it's to put down where your values are. And Jesus apparently could see this man's values were in what he had, not in who he was. And that's why he gave that advice. I don't think he gave that advice to anybody else. He just saw that particular individual's problem. He saw the attachment. He saw what he was trying to achieve. And he said, I've been doing all these things and I still don't have what I'm looking for, as if it's another degree or it's another career, or it's another accomplishment of some kind. That's all I need to do is just one more thing, and then I'll be happy because I'll just add that to my pile over here. And, Jesus, I think, was pretty perceptive. So he said, sell everything you have. Well, if he would have said that to the first man, he didn't have to say it to the first man. I think that's why he made that story to a parable like he did, because he understood the difference. When you find something, the first man recognized the value of the treasure. He recognized it immediately. When I picked that book up and opened it and just read a couple of lines, I immediately recognized the value of the book. I didn't recognize the full value, but enough to check it out and take it home, open it up there, and not be able to put it down. I read the whole thing throughout the night. So nobody had to tell me the value of that book. The implications, I had no idea. I had no idea what that was going to cause or what choices it would make me make, or invite me to make, I should say. So it's like but it was mine, in other words. It's real to me. It means something to me. And I can't pass that on to anybody. Nobody could pass it on to me. In fact, my mother had Daily Word and Unity Magazine laying around the house for years, and I never picked one of them up. Didn't know it was affiliated with Unity. Had no idea what it was. Wasn't interested. But I found that door into Unity, and it was mine. And that's always made a big impression. But that's the difference. In the first man, it was his. He found it and immediately recognized the value of it. The second man doesn't recognize the value of it because he's not willing to give himself to the process, to what it takes. And actually, I think Jesus said that tongue-in-cheek because he would know that just because you sell everything and follow him around, that you're going to have this awareness of your infinite nature. I think Jesus was quite aware that it doesn't just happen that way. The difference in these two cases is that the man who discovered the treasure saw that the field and the treasure it contained was worth more than all his possessions. In joy, he released the lesser for the greater. And that's really what it amounts to. That's the journey home. That's the spiritual path. We're always releasing the lesser for the greater. And by saying the lesser, it doesn't mean that it's not valuable to somebody. The lesser to us is not valuable to somebody. It is. And so we have to be careful to not condemn or point fingers or look down at people who are settling for something we consider of lesser value, because that's the way it works. We have people of all levels on this planet, and some are understanding themselves as spiritual beings, that's the primary reality. And what does that mean? How does that fit into my earthly life? That becomes the treasure worth pursuing. And so we look at ideas that we've been taught. We've been taught that the more we have, the more important we are, and all of that kind of thing. And so many people realize at some point in their life that that's just not true. It doesn't matter what you accomplish. You can still be very unhappy. I talked about that in one of my books. It's like you can, the firewood, you can stack it up, but it doesn't make you warm. You have to light it. The fire has to be ignited. And that's the living thing. So you can pile firewood, to the top of your house and freeze to death if you don't put it in the fireplace, if you don't put it in the stove. And that's the organic side of the spiritual journey, the spiritual path. It's got to be real to you. The wealthy young man was responding to the instructions from another. And this, in his case, was one of the best spiritual teachers that ever walked here. And it didn't matter. He placed more value on his possessions than on the thing he hoped to acquire. In other words, his quest was conceptual, while the other man's was experiential. And that's important too. You follow somebody else's ideas, it's conceptual. What does the kingdom of God look like? What am I supposed to be searching for? When I close my eyes to be still, what is it I'm supposed to be experiencing? We're asking what somebody else has said and what somebody else has taught. And we get to the point where when we close our eyes, we say, I'm here, show me what I'm supposed to be looking for. Show me the experience. Show me what you are, addressing your spiritual nature, addressing God. And that word God is problematic for some, because you close your eyes looking for God, that's kind of a weird thing. Thinking God is inside of me. What's that mean? If you think of God as energy, as life, as a presence, we make that shift. We sell that concept of the old man in the sky, or the old picture of God as an old man, because I don't want an old man living inside of me. I've got enough to deal with the old man that lives here. It's like getting older every day. But there's things that we have to wade through. We're looking for something. Are we looking for something that's ours, or are we looking for something that's somebody else's? The first man was looking for something that was his, and he gave himself to the possession of that. The second man didn't get it. So the spiritual quest has to be our own. In the beginning, we're prompted by a pristine urge to know and experience something deeper than what we've been taught. We should never forget that we are being guided by our own spiritual comforter and advocate. This is what brought us to the treasure-bearing field in the first place. So just keep that in mind. I am being guided. You ask for guidance. Don't ask for guidance. State, I am being guided right now. I've been guided to this point, and I will be guided to continue on. All right? We'll talk about something else next week. So thanks for coming out. Stay cool, and love you guys. There are answers to your healing prayers. In the silence, you will find them there. Omnipresence, you know it is your home. Find your center while through this earth you roam. Take a moment to touch the light. The healing spirit will restore your sight. There is no time. This moment is the harbor of your soul. There is no space. There isn't really any place to go. it will fall. You once had courage, but now you've lost it all. You've come too far, so even when you feel you've lost your way, keep moving on. The sun is rolling out another day. Yes, I know the many questions in our hearts, and I feel all the pain in the world. But I know as we lift our eyes, we will see all this and more. The healing light spread upon the earth, I have seen it before. There are answers. I am alive now, I am complete now, a new expression of God. I am alive now, I am complete now, a new expression of God. I am alive now, I am complete now, a new expression of God. I am alive now, I am complete now, a new expression of God. There are answers to your healing prayers. In the silence, you will find them there. There is no time, this moment is the harbor of your soul. There is no space, there isn't really any place to go. You've come too far, so even if you feel you've lost your way,
new expression of God.
keep moving on. The sun is rolling out another day.
A new expression of God.
There are answers.
You've been watching a talk given by Reverend Doug Bottorff here at Independent Unity in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us spread our message. If you would like to support us, you can do so by clicking the button in the right-hand corner of the video screen. We greatly appreciate your support. Thanks again for watching.